This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Next year marks 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Our founding document puts forward aspirations that have shaped America and inspired the world. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. But read on. The Declaration may surprise you. It speaks of the native peoples of America, calling them merciless Indian savages, and highlights their use of warfare. For years, stories of Native America have been kept separate and apart from the American story. Today, we explore the Native American experience in New England. Connecticut Public Special Correspondent Diane Orson has spent nearly a year researching, producing, and reporting the stories in this series called Still Here. And she joins me now for an inside look. Diane, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So we are very excited to dive into the stories and to hear them. And we're going to play a couple of stories from the series. But first, before we get there, Diane, walk me through the topics you explore. How did this series first start?
In my reporting for a previous series called Unforgotten, Connecticut's Hidden History of Slavery, Native American communities kept coming up in conversations. And I did a story for NPR last year about an exhibition at the Mystic Seaport Museum called Entwined Freedom, Sovereignty, and the Sea that reimagined maritime history through Black and Indigenous worldviews and experiences. And back in 2022, I actually did a piece on the repatriation of letters and diaries and sermons by an 18th century Mohegan scholar named Samson Occam from Dartmouth College to the Mohegan tribe. So I kind of felt like there were these important stories in our state and in our region that should be told. And with America's 250th coming up next year, it felt like an especially appropriate time to tell them. Native peoples are diverse. Their communities are very alive, very evolving. These are communities in New England that have survived widespread disease that decimated many local tribes. They survived epidemics. They survived warfare with foreign powers, mostly English in our region. Coastal communities in southern New England, as I mentioned earlier, in particular, endured slavery. Native peoples have had to contend with ongoing policies that strip them from their rights to their land and access to their home waters, and they're still here. They have been forced to be resilient. Many people I interviewed in our region told these incredible stories of them or their children being in classrooms where the history of Native peoples was focused pretty much on the West, on Western U.S., and equally as surprising to me was the idea that Native peoples from the Northeast are often asked if Indigenous people still exist here. So, you can visit tribal-led museums, and visitors to the museums are asking the tribal members themselves if Native people still exist in the Northeast. So, yes, they are very resilient, and they're still very much here.
And we're going to play a couple of stories from the Still Here series. And in our first story, Diane introduces us to a man who works to carry Native life forward.
It's a sunny spring morning. Nakai Clearwater Northup stands beside Wood River near white pine trees on Narragansett homelands in southern Rhode Island. Learning to manage the land means building a relationship, he says, and caring for it like a member of the family.
The land is like a child you got to take care of. You learn how to be a father or a parent from your kids. And that's the same thing with the land. You have to spend time on the land, be on the land, and understand what it needs.
Northup says Native culture and spiritual sensibility are closely connected to land. He hunts and fishes and grew up harvesting deer, turkey, and local seafood.
Living off the land is a hard job. It takes a lot of work. When I hunt throughout the year, I put in miles and miles and miles.
Northup is of Narragansett descent and an enrolled member of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. He lives on their reservation in Connecticut. There, he develops educational programs at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. Board member Michael Thomas says the museum also houses stories of Pequot tribal cousins in the Northeast.
The reality is you would be hard-pressed to find anybody in a southern New England tribe that doesn't have 2 or 3 other southern New England tribal ancestries in them.
Thomas is also Mashantucket Pequot and Narragansett.
My joke in the family is we can't teach kids about a family tree because we don't have a tree. We have a bush, just branches crossing everywhere.
Indigenous peoples once were, and still are, everywhere. For more than 10,000 years before Europeans arrived, the Northeast was home to many tribes with organized leadership, governance, and deeply overlapping histories. Native historian Ned Blackhawk teaches at Yale University and is author of the award-winning book, The Rediscovery of America.
You realize that the Northeast was, in fact, among the most diverse, heavily settled, and prosperous parts of North America at the time of European contact to begin with.
Blackhawk says we should understand early encounters between Native nations and Europeans
less as a one-sided story of contact and conquest by Europeans and their descendants, and more as an ongoing process of engagement between different peoples, different communities, different governments, and ultimately different sovereigns.
Blackhawk says early Dutch and French explorers to New England traded with Native peoples, but they also brought foreign diseases that decimated Native communities. And in the late 15th century, European explorers began to kidnap indigenous people.
They would pretend to trade with local Native peoples and then seize people and then take them back to the ships.
Some natives were sold into slavery. Others were trafficked back across the Atlantic so Europeans could gain information before returning to North America. Blackhawk says scholars are just beginning to uncover this early stealing of Native people.
It's hard to kind of piece together the biographies of a lot of these captives, but there is this already present slave trafficking of indigenous peoples across the Atlantic that we've never really learned about.
When English Puritans began to settle in the Northeast, they brought worldviews that contrasted sharply with native life. The Puritans believed their religion was the only true faith. Private land ownership and individual wealth were starkly different ideas from indigenous relationships to land and cultures of shared wealth. Conflicts led to violence. We're with Nakai Northup at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum, the largest tribally owned museum in the world.
Having the museum, which is tribally owned and operated, that allows us to tell our story from our point of view and perspective, when oftentimes our history was written by other people.
In the 1630s, the Pequots were among the dominant tribes in the region. As European settlers moved into Connecticut, violence erupted and war followed.
The Pequot War is really the first major war between a European power and a native nation. And it is a war that really sets the foundations of colonialism.
Northup stops in front of a replica of a drawing from the 1630s. It was created by an eyewitness to one of the most brutal events in early American history, the Mystic Massacre. In 1637, soldiers from the Connecticut and Massachusetts colonies with Native allies surrounded a Pequot community in Mystic and set it on fire. Within hours, an estimated 500 to 700 men, women, and children were burned alive or slaughtered.
This event was meant to eradicate us as a people.
By the end of the war, of 3,000 Pequots in Connecticut, only a few hundred survived.
From this comes a document called the Treaty of Hartford, which states that Pequot people can't live on their land, can't call themselves Pequots, can't speak their language.
The Pequots were divided into two groups, Western Mashantucket and Eastern Pequots. Many were sold into slavery or sent to live with other tribes. Northup says even now, 350 years later, Pequots grapple with the atrocity of the Mystic Massacre. A sculpture of the assault is etched into Connecticut's Capitol building in Hartford.
Still to this day on the Connecticut Capitol building, carved into stone, is a depiction of a community being burned down.
A statue honoring the Connecticut captain who led the massacre stands nearby. Today, New England's native nations live on a small fraction of their traditional homelands. Stereotyping of native peoples is deeply embedded in the American consciousness. Here's Max Scott of the Narragansett tribe and Brenda Geer of the Eastern Pequot Tribal Nation.
When I was in school, they told us that the Narragansett didn't exist. And my grandmother's at home, right? My mother's there. I know that we exist, but the idea is that we don't.
When I went to school, they said that, there were no Pequots left. They were all annihilated in the Pequot War. And I'm like, here I am,
Native peoples of the Northeast have survived attempts to erase their rich tapestry of culture and history. And they're still here.
That was part one of the Connecticut Public series, Still Here, exploring Native American resilience in New England. Diane Orson is with me this hour. And I think most of us really only learn a basic history of Native people when we're in school. But I think what's striking in the story we just heard is that you report that some Native peoples were enslaved. And I imagine a lot of people might not realize that that had happened. And there have been many, many moments throughout our history where federal and state governments work to minimize or even erase Native Americans from documents and society. So what did that look like in New England?
Right. I guess I think New England is only just coming to terms now with the fact that slavery was so central to the colonial economy in the North. The story that we grew up with was that slavery was a thing in the South, but Native American slavery was really never talked about, and it was, in fact, the early slavery. It began with the kidnapping of Native people who were trafficked back to Europe by early explorers who came here to extract information about North America before coming back to settle. Later, it became sort of part of the daily life of New England households. It was central to, farm workers and domestic help. Native people did daily chores. They worked on ships. There were a lot of mariners. And some indigenous peoples were sold overseas to colonists who were in Bermuda and the Bahamas and the Caribbean. And so there is a very extensive history there that we're just starting to learn about.
And now we're going to hear another story in the Still Here series. Native communities face continued challenges to their economic security and well-being, but many find strength in cultural heritage and tradition. Powwow gatherings are a chance to reconnect with family, culture, and values. And as Diane discovered, they're a living expression of Native identity that can be shared across generations.
It's summer, powwow season. We're in southern Rhode Island at the Narragansett Indian Tribe's 350th powwow known as August Meeting.
My name is Keoka Fawn Mars Garrick.
Mars Garrick is Narragansett and a special ed teacher in Connecticut. Each year she dresses in Native regalia, clothing she's designed, that honors her community and expresses her unique personal taste. And she steps inside a circle to dance the traditional Eastern blanket dance.
Suitors stand outside of the circle in traditional times, and women would dance around with their blanket and choose their partner by dropping their blanket.
These days, Native women may find other ways to choose their partners, she says, but the blanket dance still moves her.
Just the pride in leading my own life, being a strong and independent woman, and knowing that that decision is always mine to make.
I turned to her mom, Narragansett Tribal Counselor Heather Angel Mars Martins. Tell me about this location.
So this location that we're in right now is what we call Holy Land. It has never, ever, ever left the ownership of the Narragansett people. Our children need to know their history and their culture, their heritage. They need to know that it is a history full of richness and love, not just for each other, but for the land.
Families and children often travel long distances to meet up at powwows. At the center of each celebration is the sacred circle. There's drumming, singing, and plenty of native crafts and food. A few weeks later in Connecticut, it's time for one of the largest powwows in the Northeast. The Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation hosts Skimitzin. Festivities are just getting started when I meet drummer and singer Lancelot Gums.
I'm from the Shinnecock Indian Nation all the way in Long Island, New York.
How long have you been drumming?
Since I was about 9 years old.
What does it feel like when you're drumming?
Almost otherworldly. If you're really deep into the songs, it takes me to another place personally.
Could you sing a song for us?
Yeah, I can sing you a little something right now. Let's see, I think I'll sing the whale song. My brother Keon made this song. Me kwana me kana tawa he Piscatano Mashaya O Ponta Manu Masano Wankaro. Our people were whalers, basically saying thank you for the whales and everything that they've done for our people.
Tribal members dressed in regalia are lining up for the grand entry. Clothing is adorned with eagle feathers, colorful beads, wampum jewelry, and ankle bells. They'll parade in carrying flags of their native nations. Chief Lynn Many Hearts Malerba of the Mohegan tribe is here. She was appointed U.S. Treasurer under President Joe Biden, the first Native American to serve in that position. Malerba says powwows pass on strength and tradition to the next generation.
For me, it means continued survival. And I think that's what's most important, that we're still here to celebrate our culture, all the Native nations in this United States.
Over the past 400 years, Native nations' survival has been challenging. They've endured warfare and land theft. Today, Indigenous peoples live on a small fraction of their ancestral homelands. Most live in urban areas. Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Counselor Daniel Menahan says his people were forced to be resilient, and still are.
We have a lot of collective trauma as a people, and that continued need to, I don't want to use the word fight, but at the very least maintain, which does come with a fight. Those continued traumas give you a need to heal. And often we're able to look within our culture and find those mechanisms to heal.
Nationwide, Native Americans continue to face pervasive disparities that stifle their economic mobility. That's according to a 2022 congressional report. Some tribes in the Northeast have had economic success largely due to casinos, but overall, there's a wealth gap between Native and non-Native households. Dr. Cedric Woods has researched the economic well-being of Indigenous peoples in this part of the country. He's director of the Institute for New England Native American Studies at UMass Boston.
It's better than in some parts of the United States, but probably not as robust as New Englanders may want to think.
He calls on New England states to do a better job reaching out to Native communities.
The states need to engage with the tribes and take an honest look and assessment at state policy that has hindered and still negatively impacts Native communities, and make a commitment to developing a partnership with Native communities. That's step one.
The University of Connecticut recently announced a partnership with the 5 state-recognized tribes. They hope to attract more Indigenous students to the Avery Point campus and build a special culture of support for Native students. They'd also like to explore ways to indigenize certain courses.
It's a wonderful idea. We need that type of thing here in New England.
Darlene Kassak serves on the Schaghticoke Tribe's Women's Traditional Council.
It would mean access to education that has that two-eyed seeing point of view, an Indigenous perspective along with scholars, because we need both.
For centuries, the Indigenous perspective was lost in the narrative of U.S. history. America came into being at a cost to Native peoples, and that cost has not gone away. Still, Native Americans are resilient. You can hear it in their voices. Clan mother Sharan Wapatukwe Piper, Chris Newell, Nakai Clearwater Northup, and Anna Brown Jackson.
I want people to know that, we're not killed off in some old cowboy and Indian black and white movie. We're still here.
We as Northeastern tribes have survived, and we are still here.
Our people are here, have been here, and will continue to be here forever.
Hey, look, we're still here. We're still here.
Native Americans are still here with stories and lessons to share. But are we listening? Diane Orson, Connecticut Public Radio.
That's a part of the Connecticut Public series, Still Here, exploring Native American resilience in New England. So, Diane, as you mentioned earlier, too, that arts and culture are so important to Native people, and there seems to be this very strong desire to ensure that these cultural traditions are passed on to current and future generations. So can you help us understand that a little bit better?
Well, what I would say is I think cultural heritage and art and culture are important to all communities. The powwows and the annual gatherings are a way to carry forward traditions and values and connections with family and friends. Native communities, especially in the Northeast, are deeply tied to one another. And this is a time that they can celebrate resilience, endurance, and beauty and community and move forward. There are a lot of collaborations going on, and I'd want to mention one, which is that the University of Connecticut has recently announced a partnership with Connecticut's 5 state tribes, and they're hoping to kind of meet the threshold for a percentage of Native students at the Avery Point campus that would make UConn eligible for this label that's called Native American Serving Non-Tribal Institution. And there would also be efforts to indigenize some of the curriculum at UConn. And Chris Newell, who will be featured later in our program, is quite instrumental in trying to help make that happen.
That's Connecticut Public's Diane Orson. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our exploration of the Native American experience in New England. This is Where We Live. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. We just heard a preview from Connecticut Public's new series, Still Here. You can visit ctpublic.org/stillhere to learn more about this series. And with us is Diane Orson. She is a special correspondent here at Connecticut Public Radio, and she served as reporter and producer for the series. And joining us now also is Chris Newell. He's the co-founder and director of education for Ugamalt Educational Initiative, which is a majority Native-owned educational consultancy. Welcome back, Chris.
Hey, thank you.
We appreciate you being back here. And for our listeners, you can also join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So Diane, you interviewed Chris for the series, so we thought it would be great to hear from someone you featured.
Sure. So Chris recently co-curated a performance with some great Wabanaki musicians alongside the world-renowned cellist Yo-Yo Ma. The gathering was on the banks of the Connecticut River at dawn in New Hampshire, and here's a brief excerpt from some of the music. So those were the amazing Wabanaki singers Jeremy Tutcher and Lauren Stevens. This concert was a celebration of nature, especially water. And here's a bit of this story where we hear about the importance of water. Newell is Passamaquoddy and directs the University of Connecticut's Native American Cultural Program. He says music can be a pathway to better understand our relationship with the natural world, including water. Water is a source of creation, shaping everything around us, the contours of land, even names that define us, names like Connecticut.
In my language, Connecticut, in Abenaki, Quinatequa, tribes down here, they would say Quinatucket.
The name Connecticut comes from an indigenous word for New England's longest waterway.
Different derivations of Algonquin words that describe the river itself as long, tidal river. For us, waterways are connectors of people.
And all people are increasingly threatened by unhealthy rivers and oceans. Native peoples lived for thousands of years in harmony with the world's waterways, says Newell, and they have wisdom to share.
We can use indigenous understandings of water and waterways as lessons to learn from because we all live here now.
So, Chris, it's amazing what words can show us and the stories behind them, right? And you say waterways as connectors of people. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, in modern day times, even at Dartmouth College, where the first concert was at, the Connecticut River flows right next to the college, and it's a border. It's the border between New Hampshire and Vermont. During the time of COVID, you couldn't cross that border. You were restricted. So waterways under colonization largely have been, used as dividers of people. And this plays out in my home territory as us as Passamaquoddy people. The United States and Canada border was drawn right through the middle of Passamaquoddy territory, and we're only recognized on one side as a result of that. So that's the difference that we were trying to, use arts and music to convey a message that there's a different way of looking at water. That if you look at the way Native people used waterways and looked at waterways prior to colonization, they were large connectors of people. So a river like the Connecticut River, the long, straight river, is a marvelous example of that because something that we use up in Wabanaki territory, which is wampum, is made by the tribes in the Long Island Sound and the Cape Cod area, but is not made by our tribes because we don't have the raw materials. We don't have the quahog in our waterways. And so therefore we had to come all the way down here to be able to trade for it. And it was and still used as a way to remember our history, to make laws, to make treaties, amongst other things. And so it was very valuable to us as a result of that. And so water connected us over distances of thousands of miles at times. Even the ocean itself is thought of as a connector to, lands of Europe and Africa and other places. So, if you rearrange your thinking from the world of today and go back to when, we didn't pay to live on a free planet, the waterways were really something that brought us all together.
Well, and we just talked about how words have so many stories behind them, and now we're talking about music having storytelling behind it too, and a connector in a different way, right? So how did this concert at Dartmouth come about? And working with Yo-Yo Ma, kind of a big deal. How did that come about?
I started my partnership with Yo-Yo Ma way back in 2021. That was at Acadia National Park. I was working as executive director of the Abbey Museum, which is Maine's only Smithsonian affiliate. It focuses on Wabanaki arts, cultures, and histories, and received an email one day from the office of Yo-Yo Ma, which surprised me. I thought it was spam, and I opened it up, and it was his producer, Sophie Shackleton, and she wanted to have a meeting and let me know that he was coming to Acadia National Park, and he was starting something new with the national parks. He was thinking at first, which eventually became what's called Our Common Nature, which if you look on his website, you can dig into more. The question that was posed to me was, what could Yo-Yo Ma do with music that would be meaningful to the indigenous people of Maine, to Wabanaki people? And my answer to that was for him to experience what it would be like to play his music on the coast as the sun rose, because we have a cosmology as Wabanaki people, as people of the dawn, that we are placed in the geography we are at, and we still remain there today because we are meant to greet the dawn. And greeting the dawn, we have a ceremony that's built around that, is a way of, putting the past in the past, taking the troubles of that time and looking for the solutions to the future, and also just giving thanks for a new day. So I just wanted him to not experience a ceremony. That literally was not at my thought at all. It was just for him as a human being to play his music and entertain the sun as it rose. And Yo-Yo Ma, being who he is, decided that he wasn't going to do that on his own. So he invited us as Wabanaki people, to collaborate with him on that, and that's where the collaboration was born.
Oh, well, first of all, I want to say that the experience of being at dawn on the Connecticut River and being part of that dawn sunrise gathering was something I'll never forget. It was really meaningful, and it was meaningful to everyone around. I spoke to quite a few people who were there, and it's something nobody will forget.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely intentional, and though we don't use that as a ceremony. What we were doing was a performance. Nature is in itself sacred. And so we were there at a sacred time of the day. And so, nature really put on the show for us. That was the most beautiful backdrop you could have for the music. And what I told all the artists when it came to their selections of music, I said, whatever you have in your repertoire that you think would feel like you are honoring, welcoming a new day, whatever you felt in your heart, that's what you're performing. And so I didn't put any restrictions on them on what they would perform. I just simply left it to them to choose. And that's because we had, in the few days prior, developed a sense of community amongst ourselves. That was one of the secrets to, building this performance, this ensemble of people from different backgrounds and different cultures, was building a community amongst ourselves. And the expression of that was really that morning with the way that concert went. You got to see everybody really express themselves truly as they are.
Well, you're a person who wears many hats. In addition to being a musician, you're also an author. And given that this is going to be airing not long before Thanksgiving, I just wanted to pivot for a minute and ask you to talk about a book that you wrote called If You Lived During the Plymouth Thanksgiving. You were trying to explore both sides of Thanksgiving. And I wonder if we could just talk briefly about this.
Yeah, when it comes to the Thanksgiving narrative, the way it's been taught, 95% of it is about the English, and there's a mention of Wampanoag people. Most of the times, not even the name of the tribe is mentioned, and it's just Pilgrims and Indians. And so what that narrative has done effectively has put Wampanoag people in the minds of Americans only in the past tense. And the goal of what I wanted to do with writing that book was to kind of correct some pervasive myths. Number one, that the Wampanoags only exist in the past. That's untrue. They exist today. There's 2 federally recognized tribes in the state of Massachusetts. And so I wanted them to not experience the awkward situation when they meet somebody from outside the community where they would say words to them to the effect of, I'm surprised you're still here. Just surprising things that you wouldn't say to anybody else. But those are things that Wampanoag people consistently hear as a result of the Thanksgiving narrative. And so I intended to write a book that was, even though it was published by Scholastic, I didn't write it to please Scholastic. I wanted to write a book that would help Wampanoag people, to dispel the myths about themselves. Before these cringy situations occur, which the person that asked the question, they don't want to be in a cringy situation either. They want to be better informed as well. So I wanted to create something that before that question gets asked, at the children's level, Wampanoag people can say, "Here, read this book with your child." It'll answer a lot of really basic questions about that history and add a whole lot more of filling in the gap of what happened before and what happened after.
I want to follow up and sort of zoom out for a bit. And I know this is a really big question to ask, but what do you think in the mainstream narrative of American history we get wrong?
Number one, when history is taught, it's often taught with the time clock beginning with European discovery. And that's a big problem for American students because when we teach American westward expansion, right, which took place over about 100 years, we teach it as if it was a long, slow, gradual process. But yet, if your base of knowledge goes back 12,000 years, like my culture does, then 100 years is really the snap of a finger. And so it's only in America that we teach teach American westward expansion as a gradual process. Everywhere else in the world, they teach that history as the most rapid expansion of a population over that size geography ever in the history of the world. So it's, things that we have built into our system that unfortunately lead to implicit biases amongst us as, fellow Americans here in this country that we don't need to have if we were just a little bit better informed. And some of that, requires us to look at the good, bad, and the ugly of our history here, as human beings on this land. And, the reason for doing that is not to point fingers. It's not to say you did this wrong, you did this wrong. It's really to look at where we as human beings all together, because we all live on this place now, where we as human beings, made mistakes, name them, speak them out loud and then learn from them so that we can do better going forward, because that's really the goal, is thinking about the generations that are going to follow after. And I want them to be much more informed, and not have to dispel mythology.
Next year, 2026, marks 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and there'll be a lot of attention on the Declaration of Independence. I wonder if you could talk about, and you've touched on this just a minute ago, but ways to reframe our understanding of the Native American role in the American experience.
If you read Ned Blackhawk's book, that just came out, it really talks about the Native ties to the beginnings of what would become the American Revolution. And I also have another book coming out for Scholastic called If You Lived During the American Revolution, which will be out February 3rd in 2026. And I also include a lot of that history. The French and Indian War occurred. As a result, Britain was in debt, and couldn't afford to pay, for the soldiers that were to protect the American colonies and wanted to get that money back from the American colonies. So if you leave Native people out of the conversation, you're leaving out, a huge side, because Native people sided with the French, they sided with the English, they sided with the Americans. There's a lot of complexity, and the American Revolution would not have been won without the help of Native peoples. The first treaty signed by the United Colonies was the Treaty of Watertown of 1776, where General Washington was asking Wabanaki chiefs for help in the upcoming revolution, preserving what he ended up calling the northern border, which is now the U.S.-Canada border. And if that had not occurred, the likelihood is the U.S. border would be the Penobscot River, which is much more, to the west of where it currently is.
So we're hearing from Chris Newell, who's the co-founder and director of education for the Agamat Educational Initiative, which is a majority Native-owned educational consultancy. He's also a musician and an author, and the book we talked about is called If You Lived During the Plymouth Thanksgiving. We were also hearing from Diane Orson, who's our special correspondent here at Connecticut Public, and we will continue our look at Native peoples in our region after the break. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Catherine Shen. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. We continue our look at the Native people's experience in New England, and still with us is Diane Orson, our reporter and producer here at Connecticut Public Radio. So, Diane, you spoke with a variety of Native people from different tribes across our region.
Yes, I reached out to many tribal members, and I spoke with almost every tribe in our state, federally and state-recognized tribes. And what I'd like to do right now is play an excerpt from one of the many great conversations I've had over the past year. I went to the Institute for American Indian Studies in Washington, Connecticut, and I spoke with Darlene Kassak. As you'll hear, she's quite a wonderful storyteller from the Schaghticoke tribe.
My name is Darlene Kassak. I wear many, many hats. I began working here at the museum about 13 years ago, and now in a semi-retired position, I am now the Educational Outreach Ambassador for the museum. I'm a traditional Native American storyteller, and I serve on the Connecticut Women's Traditional Council. Women always had a lot of power in our communities. It was a checks and balances system. There was an elders' council or women's council. If the chief wanted to go to war, he had to get permission from both of these councils. When Europeans came, they didn't appreciate that power. They didn't talk about that power, and women's voices and roles in our communities was kind of buried in history.
That's so interesting. Can you explain to me about the Institute for American Indian Studies?
The Institute for American Indian Studies is not a Native-owned museum, which has its pluses and negatives. The plus side is we can talk about all tribes equally. And of course, the negative parts are, wanting to have more of Native voices. Now, our museum, since it began, we've practiced something that is called today two-eyed seeing, itwapmunk. And that means showing things from multiple perspectives. Artifacts can't tell the whole story, and I'm going to share a story with you. When my son was about 8 years old, we went to a museum in New Haven. I'm not going to say which one. And there was an exhibit, and it said primitive technology, and it had a stone axe. This is a stone axe used by Native American people to chop a tree down. And my son looked at that and said, "Mom, my ancestors weren't very bright, were they? They were kind of stupid." And I was shocked. I was like, "What makes you think that?" He says, "Look at that dull stone axe. You'd have to hit a tree for 2 years to get it to fall down with that thing." And I realized he was only seeing things from an archaeologist's point of view. And he didn't know how the Native people actually used that tool. And the museum wasn't telling that story. So when we got home, I said, "Junior, we're going to chop a tree down the way our Native ancestors did." So I sent her to the river for a bucket of mud. We got a stone that was similar to the shape of the axe we saw. I went in the house and I got my fire-making tools. We picked out a tree that wasn't real big, and I instructed him to paint a stripe, a band, around that tree about 2 feet from the ground. And he packed in this thick mud all the way around. Then I set the tree on fire down at the roots. And it burned and burned and burned, forming red-hot coals. I took 2 clamshells, I moved it over to one side of the tree. Now one side of the tree is burning more than the other. I instructed my son to use his stone to chip away at some of the red-hot coals, and I added oxygen so those red-hot coals would burn deeper and deeper and deeper into the tree. In a little while, we hear the tree making noises, groaning, cracking noises, and it starts to lean. I said, "Junior, grab that rock, help that tree fall down." Boom, 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 crash. He says, "Mom, that was brilliant. They were geniuses. They weren't using a silly rock to chop a tree down. They were using fire, and they knew how to control that fire." See the difference? That's called two-eyed seeing. An archaeologist has a role. It's an important role. It'll find an item. It'll tell you how old that item is, what that item might have been used for. They could test it to see the types of foods or whatever might have been used, but they can't tell you how it was used. And that's where Native voices are important. So throughout our museum, you hear both points of view. An archaeologist's interpretation, but then a Native interpretation as well.
That was Diane Orson talking with Darlene Kasich, who serves on the Connecticut Tribes Women's Traditional Council. And so, Diane, we're nearing the end of the hour, and you've been reporting on this topic for nearly a year. This is a big question for you, but what are the things that really stick with you from your interviews?
I have several takeaways from this past year, and I would begin by saying that this project only scratches the surface. I hope that it is opening doors for Connecticut Public and for many other organizations to pay more attention to Native communities in our region and to do a lot more reporting in the future. But I guess I'd begin by underscoring that Native peoples have been forced to be resilient over so many thousands of years. And I think we need to rethink more broadly and inclusively about America's historical narrative. Chris was talking about that earlier. This is not an easy thing to do. And at this particular moment in time, I think there are monumental challenges. But like Yale historian Ned Blackhawk, who Chris also mentioned earlier, who's in our series, his book title is called The Rediscovery of America. And I think we are at a moment where we need to think about rediscovering this nation. As a subset of that, I think I would also say that when we talk about the history of America and the history of slavery, particularly the coastal communities in our region, we need to include indigenous peoples in that history. I am really glad that school districts in Connecticut are including Native American studies and that they're talking about the eastern woodland tribes of our region, and I'm glad that they're working with local tribes to develop the curriculum. And I guess I would say one other thing, which is there are so many stereotypes out there, particularly of tribes in the Northeast, that complicate our ability to engage in productive ways, I think, with Native communities. So I think it's time to move past those stereotypes.
And Chris, as we continue to scratch the surface and hopefully get deeper and deeper as we go along, what would you like some of our listeners to keep in mind about the Native peoples in New England?
Here in the Northeast, tribes are part of the origin stories of some of the colonies, but the histories go back thousands of years beyond that. And to forget that is really a mode of erasure. Erasure is part of a genocidal policy, a way to forget that a people have existed and a place. And that actually was the policy of the early colony days. And that's something that the tribes here, especially here in Connecticut, have been working to overcome for the last 400 years. My tribe is still dealing in the state of Maine with a 1980 land claim settlement, which put our sovereignty under the boot of the state of Maine. So when it comes to our existence, all of our governments predate the United States government, which begins in the 1700s. So therefore, the United States government recognizes that in the U.S. Constitution. One of the things you'll see is Article 6 is, treaties shall be the supreme law of the land. That's because without treaties being respected on that level, then U.S. ownership, the American ownership of land would not be legitimate from its beginning. And so, therefore, the recognition of tribal sovereignty is on par with the recognition of U.S. sovereignty. One can't exist without the other. And so we are not only a part of the history of this country, we are a part of the makeup of today's United States and will be here, forging the future of this country as a big part of it as well. One of the things that we need to overcome is the erasure and, to get the implicit biases out of the American public that we only exist in the past. And therefore, my children won't have those kind of cringy questions asked to them. That's my hope for the future and for their children as well.
Chris Newell is the co-founder and director of education for Agamaud Educational Initiative, which is a majority Native-owned educational consultancy. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your experiencing with us today.
All right. Thanks for inviting me.
You're also listening to Diane Orson, who is a special correspondent here at Connecticut Public. She worked with colleagues across the newsroom here to produce Still Here. Stories air all this week on Connecticut Public Radio during Morning Edition and All Things Considered. You can also explore all of the reporting as well as pictures and videos at ctpublic.org/stillhere. Diane, thank you so much for being on Where We Live.
Thanks, Kat.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Eric Austin with help from Tess Terrible and Patrick Scahill. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.